And one thing I do want to be very sure of as we close the session is that although that became quite an interesting, series of discussions, it's equally not where I wanted it to be. My mother did not make the man I am today is not as a result of my mother.
No, but one thing I've taken away is you actually love your mom so deeply.
Oh, I did,
And that is shouldn't be taken off the table at all,
yeah.
because you've always shown and you've really tried from your side. You try to understand her. I Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode. My guest is Liam. And in case you haven't noticed, I started with the end of the conversation at the beginning of this week's episode, and for a good reason. It was to share with you Liam's desire on how to listen to this week's episode. And for me, that meant having an open heart and an open mind. It takes a lot of courage to share the very deep relationships that really matter. And in his case was his relationship with his mom and all the trials that he has gone through along his way. He shared his path of perseverance through understanding and really, for me, turning on its head the idea of forgiveness and forget. More than anything, how to forget by having beautiful, warm, loving relationships like the one he has with his long life partner and his father. So grab that hot drink, or if you're going on that walk, put those headphones on and enjoy this week's episode. Who you are today would not have happened had it not been possible for.
Wow. Okay. So who I am today would not have been possible. Okay. Unquestionably, first and foremost, my husband.
Oh.
All right. And I'm not, I'm not blowing smoke up his arse or anything like that, but he has been unfailingly supportive of me through our relationship. Unfailingly. Okay. He's the complete you'll meet him one day, but he's the complete antithesis of me. He's very quiet, very unassuming. He's a spoilt little madam, but he's
A spoiled little madam.
yes, he was spoilt by his mother, and Yorkshire mother with her son. He has been unfailingly supportive. I met him when I'd been in my first long-term relationship of about 5 years. That ended. He ended it, and at a very, very difficult time. He had agreed that I could take voluntary redundancy from work actually leave work, because I decided to go back to university as a 24-year-old, 25-year-old. I had been a very lazy student following, the same illness that I'd had from the age of 12. So I had zero. I almost died at the age of 12, and I had zero interest in academia. I was always artistic. I was not sporty, and to the point where it just wasn't celebrated. I had stuff in a sort of art exhibition, but they didn't tell me about that. Stuff that I'd prepared, I'd made at school, and it got selected, but because it wasn't, a profession, I did not excel, and also having had the aneurysm at the age of 12, my drive to succeed academically was gone. It was gone.
So why did you go back at 24? What were you going
Because I knew I mean, I don't want to say wasted that experience, but I knew that there was more in me, and I was at the wrong school. So so what happened was, in my middle 20s, I had more surgery. This giant scar that I've got down here. I can't see it very well, but it goes from there to there, and from there to there. And I had 3 more aneurysms at the site of the first surgery. So I had a very long recovery time.
Already at 24, you had 3 surgeries.
Oh, by then, 24, I'd had my first surgery at the age of 10, another one at 12. My appendix burst at 21, and then the big shit happened here. So So it was a long recovery time. I was in and out of hospital several times because I also ended up with an edema in my brain, and which could have killed me. And so in that recovery time, I just remember I was reading, and I read. It was a series of essays by Oliver Sacks, the psychologist, where he looks at the very rare but as well as very common psychological phenomena, such as people who there's a fault in their brain, and they see through their eyes, their brain processes what's going on as a series of photographs. They never see anything moving. There's a name for it, I can't remember, it's so long ago, but it makes it very awkward for people like to cross the road, because they see a bus, and then the next time they see the bus is there. So it was a really, really interesting book, a series of about 25 chapters of these very rare but very interesting psychological phenomena. And I sort of devoured it because I was stuck in a hospital in bed, and I couldn't go out, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. And it sparked an interest in psychology. So in that recovery period, I thought to myself, you know what, I don't have a degree, I really should have one. Okay, and this is again about seeking approval from my parents. And that was, my sister was very bright. She got 12 O levels. She passed 3 A levels. She went not to her first choice of university, but excelled at her subject, and even bypassed doing a master's and went straight into a PhD, finishing it at the age of about 22.
Was that your measurement?
Was it my measurement? No, but it was.
No, but I mean by your family standards that you felt.
No, they always knew I was more artistic than academic, but they came from a generation where get a profession. That generation, where I was as a kid, I was always into amateur dramatics and things like that, and the people that managed the shows said, you really ought to send him to stage school, even if it's just on the weekends, because he has something and it needs to be fostered. But Irish economic migrant parents go, very nice, very nice, but let's get him qualified in something first.
Did that have anything to do with the time where they moved from Ireland? And I never knew this, but I only heard about much later that Irish individuals here had a lot of racism.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, my dad, by this point was already an accountant. He moved from Ireland 59, I think it was, maybe a bit before that, maybe 58. Moved to Ireland, to Leicester, got a job with AEI, which was some sort of electrics company anyway. And when he was looking for lodging, it sounds like a joke, but on the in the lodging house, in the boarding houses, digs, as he and his friend from that time called it, pasted on the window of these houses that had adverts in the back of the local paper and so on. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs. Sorry, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. Dogs came above the Irish.
Wow.
And my dad was bloody qualified. He was a qualified accountant, but because he was Irish, no. So, luckily he did end up in a good boarding house and made a good friend who sadly passed away maybe 18 months ago. But he speaks of that, and it was absolute racism.
Do you think how much of that had combined with your family, or like your sister excelling so much, having all of that around you, did that not bring a lot of pressure towards you, for you to always say, okay, you got to excel, that you felt like your artistry was suppressed?
Yeah, absolutely. There was that thing of behind my sister and seeing how bright she was, and I was never going to be that academic. I joke with my partner now about maybe I'll go and do a PhD. Not a chance. Not a chance. I promise you. But there was just this moment where I knew, when I was in hospital, I knew I was going to be incapacitated for some time, and I needed I needed to prove to myself that I could do it. It wasn't about my mother. It wasn't about my father. It was about me. I knew it was in there. Psychology had sparked an interest. And so I actually went back to Birkbeck. I mean, amazingly, got a place at Birkbeck, which was unreal, because they're always in about the top 3 of university courses offering psychology. They're always considered in the top 3,
really? Oh.
even though it's an adult education college, born of the University of London. Yeah. The college was created to allow people who were parenting, people who were a bit older and just decided they wanted to have a degree, or they wanted to change their thing. So, quite unbelievably, I was still working. I got a place. I went. I did it. I didn't excel. I didn't get first or anything, but it was bloody interesting. And it was, and a commitment of 4 years of going up to college after work. I think
that's quite a milestone as well.
Oh God, yeah.
You've proven to yourself, and for no one else but for you.
Yeah, exactly. It was exactly about me at that point. It was very selfish and completely opposite to what I'd listened to as a child growing up.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, by doing the exact opposite, you make a completion within yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So but the completion was still not complete.
What was missing?
Something else. I knew it wasn't it, because I didn't do the degree as a method to practice psychology. It was just a very interesting subject. That's all, and so I knew there was more. I knew there was more for me to do. I didn't know what it looked like. That's the thing. Okay. So I went back. I continued working. I sort of changed careers a little bit, because I needed to work a shift pattern so that I could attend college well. I was working when I started college. I was working for an American company who, when I started working there, it was a really, really fine company with a fine chairman that I worked for. He then decided to retire from the thing because, like, the board of directors had just become so hateful, and I had to leave. Well, principally, I'm lying at my then partner's house, lying in bed, having been signed off for 6 months. Being checked on every couple of weeks, but essentially told by the surgeon and by my GP, you will be off work for 6 months. And I remember the phone ringing, and I picked it up, and it was the new CEO, who is this woman, saying, we will have to make a business decision about your future unless you come back to work now. And
but you had 6 months off.
No, at that point it was about 2 months I'd had off. So stupidly, I did not have the strength to take them to court to let them fire me, and I went back to work, and it unquestionably impacted my recovery.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But interestingly, and here's something. The woman who was then the CEO, she used to have a presence on LinkedIn. I can't find her anymore. But I found her successor, who was there on the phone during that phone call. And I sent her a message. I sent her a message telling her exactly what I thought about her and what kind of a woman she was. And I ended the message with, I hope you and yours never have to go through what I went through, because if I did wish that upon you, that would turn me into you or Jane. And that's the kind of human being I never want to be.
How did you feel when you did that?
Relieved. I've been carrying this for, well, since, what was it, 94, since 1994. Carrying this complete
curiosity. Did she ever reply?
No, of course not. She read it. I know she read it because her little thing came up, but she never replied, and I don't think she ever will. But it was good for me to get it off, and it's in her head now. It is in her head. You
remind me of this struggle. I was struggling with this the other day. I was talking to my mom, and it's this guilt to forgive. People tell you, oh, let it go. Don't make such a big deal about it. And I think that's also culturally woven in. And I just think sometimes I've seen the opposite happened. I seen resentment build so much and affect this mental health
Yeah.
because of this. Like, you must forgive, or you must not say
No.
anything. Have I got that narrative wrong? I always wonder.
Well, we're told as children, forgive and forget, because anything that goes outside of forgiveness, somebody has wronged you physically, mentally, whatever, financially. Oh my God, I mean, that happens as well. But if you don't, we're taught forgive, because otherwise it eats away at you. That's basically true, but I don't think you need to forgive and forget. I think you just need to let it go. And
What's the difference for you?
uh, forgiveness is really powerful. So if you forgive something who have wronged you, and that wrong has lived in your head rent free for I don't know how long,
Yeah.
it's a real thing that has eaten away at you, that has potentially affected your relationship with your family, with your loved ones, with yourself. And if you forgive, you're letting you're going, oh, you know what, that's okay, don't worry about it. No, it's not okay. It's not okay. You wronged me, and if I forgive you, we're never going to have this a discourse about it.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm at
So
that
how do
stage,
you how do you forgive without that guilt? Would you say that? I mean, you
well,
showed up and you spoke about it.
for me, it's just it's more about forgetting. It's not forgiving. I don't forgive. When I was that badly wronged, I am not going to forgive that. I promise you. But having written that message to her on LinkedIn has provided some closure around the events of that time. When I'm writing my will at the age of 24, lying on a deathbed, told you're not going to survive, and writing my will, and then just going, you know what, I'm not going to forgive you. But now that I have approached this subject that's been in my head for the last 30 years, I can forget it.
You're saying, I
Yeah,
gotta forget it. I don't have to
yeah.
forgive it.
I don't have to forgive it. Why would I? If somebody wrongs you, if somebody does something so heinous to you that you feel desperately wronged, why would I forgive that? Why? I can forget it. I can let it go. Absolutely. Once I've gone through my process, I can let it go. But I don't need to forgive that person for the way they behaved. I don't behave that way. You don't behave that way. Decent people don't behave that way. So why would I say it's okay for you to do that? It's not.
So have you ever had, so you've had this with your career. I mean, at 24,
Yeah.
right? You've had to face your life decisions, and then somebody's forcing you to make a decision that you were just tender at 24. 24, what did we do? What do we really, really have so much ahead of us at the same time? And here you are confronted with life. Then there's LGBTQ plus, which if you're going back so many years, you must have also faced a lot of barriers there.
Yeah.
So that whole idea of forgiving and forgetting for you, that's in a lot of pockets of your life.
Oh yeah.
So
no idea.
So in talking about it from the LGBTQ relationship side of it,
knowing I was different from a very early age, and only being able to identify that I was gay, and about the age of 14, I worked it out. I worked out that it was men, it was not women. Although I had girlfriends and did all that kind of stuff, but knew in my heart that there was something different than the other boys at school. And I went to my school was an all boys school. So I was picked out as being the gay boy, and principally because you wouldn't know it now because of the beard and the head, but I was a really bloody hot teenager.
if you got it, own it. That's what I say.
And so whenever there was a sort of like a disco which was partnered with the local girls' grammar school, I always had the prettiest girls as on my arm, because I was hot, and tall. But at the age of 14, kind of understanding that's without making it quite so lucid, but knowing that that's never going to be part of my life, and I'm not going to be married and because there wasn't a choice to be married to men then, and at that point it wasn't even a consideration for me. I just knew that I was more attracted to men than attracted to women.
So you're living with that secret, right?
Oh yeah, certainly as a teen. Yeah. But once I left home, sort of unofficially left home, I did, because I'd missed out on university, I'd gone to work in the city, saved up enough money, and then went on a round the world backpacking trip for a year. That was very much when I finally said to myself, you're gay, and it's okay to be gay. And if anybody has a problem with that, that's their problem. It's not mine.
When was that moment? Was that during your travels?
Oh yeah. It was in Sydney. I remember. I can completely. I was writing an aerogram. Do you remember those? The blue piece of paper that you folded three ways. I was writing an aerogram to my family.
God, that's ages.
1988. Writing an aerogram to my parents, and I had this intention that I was going to, at the end of the trip, I was going to sell up what few possessions I had and go back to Australia. And I was sitting on the sort of pier side or the dock side at Rose Bay, which is a very lovely suburb of Sydney. But I remember writing this aerogram, and I got sort of halfway through. I was kind of explaining I was going to come home, and I was, blah blah. I was going to complete the trip, come home, sell what few possessions I had, and then make my adult life in Australia. About halfway through the letter, I kind of got to it, because just at that point, they'd announced at home, they had announced the Channel Tunnel project was going to go ahead.
Okay.
And I'm sort of, I'd gone with this very emotional sort of, I'm going to write, and I'm going to, and that's it. And nobody's going to change my mind and blah, blah, blah. And
the warrior, as I call it,
Yeah, the warrior, yeah. With his...
I'm going to make a difference with my pen.
So I'm right. And halfway through the letter, I kind of went, hang on, if I come and live here, it's on the other side of the world. And yes, you can get home. Most immigrants tend to, in Australia, they're able to negotiate sort of, you work for a year, you work for 2 years, and then the company gives you like 6 weeks off in a row, so you can go back to Europe to see your family. So it's a very positive way to work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was this announcement: the Channel Tunnel was going to go ahead, and I clearly remember this moment. I absolutely remember this moment. I can tell you what I was wearing. Where I went, hang on, I can have breakfast in London, lunch in Paris, and dinner in New York. I'm like, why would
I stay in Australia so far?
Yeah. So that was a real light bulb moment for me. And you might think that that it was a bit fanciful. In as much
it's yours. That's okay.
Yeah, it was the moment that took me. Now I've never done it. I've never had breakfast in London, lunch in Paris, and dinner in New York. But I did go to New York for a cocktail party once and flew back the next day. So.
Okay, Liam, can I have that? You could have rubbed that off on me, Perfect. Joie de vivre.
You don't get that in Australia.
So you didn't come. So that's the moment when you said, okay, I'm going to charge with a pen. You didn't write the letter? Did you send that?
I changed the direction of the letter, completed the letter, and sent it home. In it, I was essentially kind of coming out without using the words, but I was kind of expressing that there was a change in their son. I don't think I kind of even intimated that they might not be too thrilled with it, but I think I just kind of went, it's taken me to 12,500 miles
to realize that,
or realize who I am, not what I am, but who I am.
No. When you got back, did you have to tell them, or did they?
Well, what happened was, I mean, it's a long story.
If you don't mind me asking.
No, absolutely. If I minded, I would tell you. I love talking about myself. Can you tell?
Okay, that's why we're on a podcast.
Well, it's also that thing, Yeah,
all right, so tell me, got back.
So got back, had an interesting Christmas, because I got back on, as I say, July 31st, August 1st, something like that. Was back living at my parents' home. My sister was at that point engaged. She was living in a flat in London with a friend and whatever. Go for Christmas, and and obviously I've grown as a person, and there were micro arguments, there were snidey comments, there were um, uh, an under the current, or a sort of underflow sort of feeling of discomfort, and which was two-way. You know, I felt it from my parent. I felt it from my mother, not from my father. I've never felt anything negative from my father, but I felt it from my mother, and I felt it in myself. You know, I was not happy, and there was this huge argument, and my father came up. And so remember, this is my first Christmas after the round the world. So he comes up and he says, "Your father, can I come in?" So I come in. So he comes in my bedroom and he said, "What's going on?" He's very calm, my dad. It wasn't what's going on. He said, "Oh, you know, is everything all right? What's going on?" And I said, "We might need to sit down." He said, No, I'm all right." And I said, "No, I insist you sit down." So I sat him on my old single bed. I sat on one of the chairs and I said, "There's something I need to tell you." And he said, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "Well, I'm gay." His face dropped a little and he sort of nodded a bit, and you could see he was thinking, and he just said, "Look, well, you're still my son and I'm still your father and I love you, and that's that. Do you want to investigate any kind of psychological help, maybe, if you're struggling with this, or if you really know or you don't?" And I said, "Dad, I know." He said, "Well, you kind of, how do you know?" And I said, "Because in the kindest way possible, I've had physical relations with men and physical relations with women, and there's only one gender where it feels right.
Yeah.
And that is men. And I know that's going to be hard for you. And I apologize if it's making it very hard for you. If it, you know, it's not my intention, but it's who I am. And that is almost certainly why we are having these micro arguments, my mother and I, and so on." And he said, "Well, nothing's changed in my book." He said, "You're still my son. I still love you. And I'm still your father. And anything I can do to help if you need it, it's there. If you don't need it, I respect your decision." And I said, "Well," so then he said, so I'm sitting at my old desk going, "What?"
Getting the response you didn't expect.
Yeah, totally well, I didn't expect anything aggressive. I didn't expect something so open and loving
And yeah, I was going to say it's a very loving way
paternal.
of acceptance.
You know.
Yeah.
And then he said, so after I sort of, you know, caught my breath, because it really was, he said, "Do you want me to tell your mother?" And yeah, you did side eye there. You just did side eye. Yeah, I did side eye.
No, you know why I'm thinking? Because I'm wondering in my head, there's a thought going, does it make a difference because your mom didn't have a sibling, but your father was from 7? So
Yeah,
therefore had
definitely.
much more of a tapestry of understanding
Definitely.
emotions.
And I thought for a moment, I said, "Look, that's very kind of you." But no, it's not your job to tell. It's my job to tell. And it's obviously not today. You know, it's not now. And I would respectfully request that you keep this between us. I know that's a really big ask because it's your wife. I'm only a product of your marriage, but it's not for you to say, "I think I genuinely need to do it myself." Anyway, long story short, 3 years later, he kept it from her for 3 years.
For 3 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. Because my mother is such an energy vampire, and there was never the right time. And then one day I used to donate money to the Terence Higgins Trust when I was living at home, because it was the start. It was a few years into the AIDS crisis. So anything I had left at the end of the month before I got my next paycheck, I used to just give to the Terence Higgins Trust. My bank had an instruction. Yeah. What's left, send it there. And so they were still sending marketing materials years later. And my mother opened one of them that was addressed to me. And she was just being the most objectionable woman I've ever met. And eventually I just kind of went home. But as with all children, you call when you get home to your place and say, "I'm safely home," you know.
Yeah.
And so she was obviously waiting just to pick up the phone the minute it rang. And she picked up the phone saying, "You have something to tell me." Not, "Oh, some mail arrived for you. You have something to tell me." And I knew what it was going to be. And I said, "Yeah, I do actually." And she said, "What do you?" And I said, "No, stop talking. I'll drive back down tomorrow. I'm not doing this on the phone." I said, "Ma, listen to me. I'm driving down tomorrow. I will see you tomorrow morning. We'll talk about it then." My dad was at work. I drove down. My dad was at work. and and I can tell you where I was sitting, where she was the whole stuff. I said, right, well, obviously we've been butting heads for the last 3 years from coming home from Australia and around the world trip, and and there is a reason, and I think you know what the. No, I don't know anything. I said, well, look, it took me to go all that way to understand who I am, and I'm a gay man, and there you go. I'm sure I didn't even get out the words, I'm sure you'll be upset, because by this point, she's now screaming, how can you do this to me? I've been a bloody good mother. How can you be a homosexual? Screaming, flames on her head. She went out of the living room, she slammed the door, and she went to the kitchen, she slammed the door. Then I heard her storming upstairs, slamming her bedroom door, and storming back down. Then I heard her coming down the hallway into the living room, and she threw the door open. She went, are you interested in children? What mother says that to their son? And I kind of went, oh God, it's this. I thought you were going to get into a discourse with me about this, but you want to know if I'm a paedophile? Of course I'm not a paedophile. And then I sat there and I was trying to explain to her the difference between homosexuality and pedophilia.
How nervous were you at that time, or how?
Oh, I was angry at that
inside. Point. Yeah, were you? Yeah, I was anger? I was
inflamed because she was so narrow-minded that she thought gay people are pedophiles. So anyway, I tried to explain. She was having none of it, blah blah blah. So I waited a suitable amount of time until she'd stopped rending her clothes and throwing herself on the floor and screaming at me that I was a bad son and how could I do that to her, and left. And from then on, it was kind of awkward. She got
throughout your life, or
more or less.
She never came to.
Well, she loved me in her own way, which was the wrong way. When I proposed to Alistair and we took them out she forbade it. When we announced we were working in South Africa, and I proposed to him flying home on New Year's Eve on a flight somewhere over Namibia. And it was it was about 18 months after the civil partnership law had been passed. So it's quite, I didn't want to do it immediately. I wanted to see what the country's reaction was going to be and how it would, pan out.
Makes sense.
And it went well. So, that's why I asked. I said, so obviously Alistair and I have been together coming up 10 years now. We want to formalize our relationship. There are tax benefits for this. There are life insurance benefits to this. But we intend to be married on, and that's as far as I got. We intend to be married on, and my mother, literally, it was as though somebody had punched her, levitated from the booth and slammed her back against, I forbid it. I forbid it, her very words.
Was she religious? But was she religious inclined?
She had a faith. She did have a faith, but I forbid it.
Was that the driver of her non-acceptance, you think, or was there?
No. She was a very narcissistic, self-centered, selfish woman.
But then, Liam, let's go back to this. How do you then forget and forgive? I mean, this is your relationship.
I don't forgive her.
Okay, but how do you forget it? Because remember, you said you can forget.
I don't. Well, I mean, there is forgetting it because how do I forget it? I've been with Alistair for 27 years. That's how I forget it. We have a beautiful home. We have a loving relationship. We have good friends. We don't want for anything. We've made our life, and so, all the things she could try to do to stop me making my life have never worked. Forbidding me from being married to the man I love. How ridiculous. And I remember looking at her across the table and saying, well, with the greatest respect, mother, what you forbid and what you don't forbid is neither here nor there. We're getting married on July the 21st. We'd like you to be there, but if you don't want to be there, that's your business. I'm not going to fight you for it.
As an Indian woman, I would have been petrified if that happened. My mom and dad wouldn't, but if I had come home and said, I'm marrying X, Y, and Z, and they didn't approve, it would have been like, no.
Yeah.
I think I would have frozen in time. I
Yeah.
think I would have frozen in time. So for me, I've come to understand from our conversation, forgetting means I'm going to do me and I'm going to enjoy doing me.
Yeah. And I would like you to be a part of
Part of
me,
it. Yeah.
but that part of me that is the sharing part of me, if you want to be a part of my life, you respect my decisions. You don't have to agree with them. You have to respect that as an adult, I'm able to look at the pros and cons. I'm able to look at, long-term benefits, short-term benefits. And also I look at how is that going to impact the life of people around me. There's nothing in that situation impacted my mother's life. My father leant across the table and put his hand across Alistair, because Alistair was at this point just like white as a sheet, terrified. My dad put his hand, my dad was an accountant, right? And he goes, "You're doing the right thing," to Alistair. Because he went into his accountant's head. He went, "You've got a home together. If you're not civilly partnered or married, and one of you dies on the way home from work, the surviving partner is liable for tax on the entire value of the estate, not half the value, the entire value."
I had no idea of that.
Yeah, so you have to be civilly partnered, and there's no such thing as common law in England. That only exists in Scotland. So everything we've worked for, everything, all of our savings, not that there is many because we do spend on travel, and that suddenly the surviving partner who's dealing with the death of somebody they've loved and dearly loved in that state of shock, they're having to consider putting the house on the market because the government wants to take 40% of the total value of your assets.
Yeah, don't get me started on that
Yeah.
one.
So but exactly. So so that was kind of interesting. And what we're going home, screaming in the pub. And my dad looked at me and said, "No, we're not. Alistair, Liam and I have not finished eating. You'll sit there and wait until we decide we're going." So, fuck yeah.
It seems like your dad knew how to
My dad didn't
calm
have his.
her. I would say the word calm her.
Oh
Calm
no.
her. Or no?
No. He knew how to. He could now and again. He could stop her. If the finger came up, that was a stop. I've had enough.
That was the stuff. Okay.
I've had enough. Let it go. I've had enough. And he'd go, I've said my last word. Enough. And then she would shut down. But she didn't come to the wedding. My dad sat in the front row with my sister and her husband, and she didn't come. Do I forgive? I don't think I need to forgive because she probably would have spoiled it. Do I forget? No, I'm not going to forget that. And
how do you apply the forget and not forgive? Like you said, you remember how you spoke about it in terms of career. But with your mom, it's, it is a different dynamic.
Oh, it is a different, especially when you're a boy.
So how do you, to reconcile that from the inside? I can only imagine it to be really tough,
Yes, no. Yes, no. My mother, I finally began to understand what an energy vampire she was. She just sucked energy out of the room because she was raised an only child of semi-professional parents. Her mother was a draftswoman for shipbuilding in Belfast. So Harland and Wolff, basically the company, the successor of the company that built the Titanic. She was a draftswoman. So she was a technical artist. Kind of unusual for a woman in those days. And her husband, my grandfather, was the electrical foreman at the same shipyard. So that meant, he was an electrician. He was a qualified electrician. He wasn't management, but he was the foreman. He was in charge of the electricians on the shipbuilding floor, which meant he could wear a bowler hat at work. So photos of him at work, in the fucking 40s, he's got a bowler hat on. And that's how you identified who was the foreman. So if you had questions or comments or concerns, you looked for the guy with the bowler hat on. But she was an only child of semi-professional parents. So my father, fucking one of seven, he didn't have his own bed until he left home.
That's what I'm saying. It's amazing. It's almost like generational pain or generational status, or that gets passed down in the way we behave, that we don't know when to stop it. So it seems like your mom just couldn't understand that how she was made, that ended up influencing the way she raised you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what it sounds like to me.
And it's you know,
And
she never wanted for anything. My dad joked about it, you know, because he had 5 brothers and 2 sisters. The latest brother coming when he was, you know, an adult, but he used to joke about it when we were growing up as kids. He said, you know, he'd try and get us out of bed on Saturday and Sunday. You know, we were teenagers, was lazy, and you know. And he goes, when I was your age, if you didn't get out of bed when your parents told you, all you could do was comb your hair and look out of the window because there weren't enough clothes to go around.
Wow.
So there were obviously, it was the way, you know, it was the way he kind of tried to say to us, look, you're very lucky. You know, you do not have the childhood I had. But, and it's always a bit of a joke, you know, comb your hair and look out the window.
Well, yeah, but it's also sharing a lot of history in that
sense. Yeah.
Like be great, you know,
find your be grateful for what you have. Yeah, find your gratitudes and acknowledge them, and acknowledge the people around you who do stuff for you without even thinking about it.
And it's interesting how your mom and dad paired, because it's so
I have not. I asked him after you know, she was screaming at me, was I a paedophile? You know, some weeks after, and I never played golf, you know, but my dad said, let's go to the golf club, and we went and had a sort of ridiculous 9 holes, and then sat in the clubhouse and had a drink. And I remember saying to him, and this is another thing I have great honor about my father, and that was, I said, and my mother was like Jane Russell. Big brown hair, very beautiful, big, you know, hourglass figure, tits, waist, arse, and she, you know, as a young woman, she'd won a beauty contest and all, you know, all that nonsense, you know, that nowadays we laugh at. But then it was a part of their life.
Yeah, it was very much so.
And I said to him in the golf club, I said, "How did you end up with her? She's the most selfish, most unkind, one of the most unkind people I know. How did you?" And he said, and you know, and the reason I say that is because if anybody's like let's say you were family friends, if your mother was ill or your father was ill or your brother was ill or something, you know, we'd get phone calls in the middle of the night, and you know, back on the day of landlines, you know, and you never phoned after 10 o'clock unless it was a problem. The phone would ring, and the next thing you know, I'd see my mother running down the stairs, throwing a coat on and jumping in the car and going to whoever it was, because there had been some family crisis and she needed to pick up the children and bring them back to our house because, you know, but so to the community, she was she was an angel.
Yeah.
She was an angel. To me, anything. But he did say, then I said, how did you end up with her? She's so very different from you, and she was so spoiled, and you continue to spoil her. And he said, never question, he said, and he put his drink down, he said, never question my love for your mother. You are an issue of that love. You are a result. I
was going to say that you wouldn't be you if she wasn't there.
No, I know, absolutely. So, I would have preferred to be a different me if I didn't have to deal with so much hate and anger and vitriol growing up. You know,
but even with all that hatred and anger, if you look at your life, you have achieved quite a bit.
I know, but we don't brag about that.
Well, I'm asking you to brag about it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I love it. I honest to God, who? That's another thing. It's like she was religious and I wasn't. But
I think that's podcast 2.0 for the two of us.
Yeah, you know, but I get it. And this actually comes back very much to a question some minutes ago about who are you today, and you know, what do you look to, and how do you focus that? And I said Alistair, because he has supported me through all of my career changes, going back to school, you know, twice, you know, the first time for the first degree and the second time for my master's. He never really questions me if we have something that that might be impacting us as a couple or individually. We sit and talk about it, but it's never unpleasant. It's supportive to one another,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and so very much the 56-year-old man I am now, a substantial chunk of that has come from Alistair, or come from his support of me.
How has he reconciled? How has he shared with you his insight about your mom
Oh, he wouldn't. He
and
so
your mom?
it came to the point when we so about 5 years before she died, my mother had a habit of using some very passive aggressive language at me, like, "You're a changeling. I gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and this is what I ended up with." I heard that thousands of times. Also, there was another one as well. Oh yeah, the passive aggressive. "I'm sorry." What's it? She goes, "It'll come to me in a minute, I'll tell you." But what did she say? See, this is my memory from my bloody aneurysm. So she had another one. It was, "I'm sorry, I disappoint you so much." Or, "I'm sorry, I'm a disappointment to you," which was never. I never.
Sounds like she was actually very harsh on herself.
Yeah, I mean, I think she probably was. She was probably brighter than she allowed herself to be, but she couldn't handle questions of, if I'd said that black bird out there is black, she would say no, it's white, just to create an argument. She was an only child. She didn't know how to exist and she was spoiled by her parents. And I don't think she ever really understood how to interact with people.
Yeah, I think it does make it, I mean, to me, it make it very aware that how having siblings in your life does make a difference. It
Doesn't
really
it?
does,
I mean, how many do you have?
I have three, and
Right.
we argued. I mean, there were times where I've had some serious arguments with them. But when I look back in hindsight, I'm so grateful for the arguments
because
it drew us closer.
And it exposed you to thoughts you may not have had,
No,
the ideas you may not have had, So it's very much, I mean, she was hard on herself, don't get me wrong, but she was never wrong.
Or she'd never admit that she felt wrong.
She would never. Oh, God, no.
Did you ever see her vulnerable? Ever?
No.
Never.
In her world, everything she believed in was the only way. You could not persuade. You could put scientific proof in front of it. She would disagree with it. What do they know? They don't know. 99%. That's not 100%. So there is an error rate. She didn't understand that. The statistics of 99% are basically 100. And so I never saw her vulnerable. I saw her vulnerable when she was dying. When she had her. Yeah, she got cancer. Oh God, it was. I mean, that was a strange time.
Do you ever think that you can reconcile or find grace from it all? Because it's so. I'll tell you why I'm like that. I find it so hard, and I find it challenging for myself when here's someone who's given birth to a child, and you have this image. Maybe it's just me, but their image of the most preciousness is when they're in their womb, and they give everything to you.
Oh yeah. Oh.
And then still you find yourself as a child at odds because they're not picture perfect, right?
No. You realize your parents are not infallible. Yeah, and that's one of the great learnings of life, that your parents are not infallible. But with that comes, I know I'm not infallible, but if I need to learn something, I seek out information sources to help me understand why, what is it I'm missing out of this picture. And here's the one odd thing, and we'll give. I mean, and this isn't a forgive or forget moment, but after I came out, my mother, when she stopped working full time, she signed up as a victim support worker, charity. So people who have been burgled, people who have been attacked, people, whatever, they could go to victim support. Victim support will send someone around your house and talk you through all the things that you can do and blah, 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 and what help you can receive from the police and so on. So she did that, she's very community minded, my mother, but one year I discovered she'd also taken part in the homophobic bullying or homophobic violence course. So she could go, your hands out like that, my hands out like that as well. Absolutely like that. Couldn't go to her son's wedding, but could talk to strangers about homophobic violence.
I keep
Where
coming
does
now.
that come from?
Well, this sentence comes to me. I don't know, maybe I'm thinking along with you, is being an only child or being very also socially driven.
Yeah.
So your goodness, or you're perceived as I'm a good human being, is projected by the amount you do outside of yourself.
Yes.
So the charities and everything. But that doesn't mean that you have the tapestry on how to work with the difficulties close to you. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. There's no energy spent on the stuff close to you. No, absolutely not. Always spent on someone else.
So it's always been like, it almost sounds like she was raised that to be a good person, you have to show it outwardly. But she never got the education from the inner world of how to understand it. And your dad is like the complete, like the missing part of her.
Yeah.
Came along.
And I absolutely believe, you're absolutely right. And I absolutely believe that missing part, that's why their marriage was so successful. There was never any talk of divorce. There was never any rows. There was never any affairs. Absolutely. My father was the missing part of her being.
And and she of his, actually, as well.
Well, so I wonder about that, because or maybe I don't know. I've never really thought of it in that way, in that direction. But certainly, and here's something I found the other day. Unfortunately, I don't have the source for this. It just appeared on one of my social platforms, and this basically because my grandmother was very manipulative, as well. She would show
her side.
On her side. After her husband died, she moved to England for a while, and for about 7 years. Every time she came to the house, she would say, "Oh, you put on weight," once a week.
But that's what I'm saying. It sounds like it's been passed down.
Yeah. So this was a quote that appeared without, and I wish I could find out who the source was in order to honor them. "Your grandmother didn't heal her trauma, so she passed it on to your mother. And with your mother in a consistent state of survival mode, she couldn't love you properly. Let that cycle of trauma and pain end with you."
And that makes, from the work that I do, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely true, because her mother was, as manipulative, as unkind as my mother. My mother just followed on,
So when you're saying that, I understand in the terms of forgetting. To me,
yeah,
that to me is about you by ending that trauma with you.
Mm-hmm.
You say, okay, well, I'm not passing this on anywhere else. By ending it with your making that certain completion within yourself, you actually heal hers, which is, I know it sounds strange, but that's you forgetting it. Because by you making it here, you don't need to hold on to it and forgets it.
Yeah.
That's what I come to understand.
Yeah, well, that's pretty accurate.
We're at the end of today's episode.
Lovely.
And I really appreciate I enjoyed today's conversation. It also touched my heart quite a bit. Okay. Opening up about your relationship with your mom. I didn't expect we would go down.
I didn't expect that, but it just sort of happened, and you were asking questions that drew me to that place. And one thing I do want to be very sure of as we close the session is that although that became quite an interesting series of discussions, it's equally not where I wanted it to be. My mother did not make the man I am today is not as a result of my mother.
No, but one thing I've taken away is you actually love your mom so deeply.
Oh, I did.
And that shouldn't be taken off the table at all.
Yeah.
Because you've always shown, and you've really tried from your side, you try to understand her. I think it shares a lot about you, and even about her in her own way, in
Yeah.
her own struggles.
Yeah.
I don't see it as a negative thing. I just see it as this is part of life. We do go through those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there you
Absolutely.
have it. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. And if you did, please be sure to follow, hit subscribe, or join our newsletter. And if you could share this with someone who is struggling with this whole forgiveness and forget, maybe this will inspire them to think differently from the inside out. Until the next one, take it easy.